Okay, so thank you so much for all of these amazing questions that have come in about climate change and what to do about it. I'm going to rattle through all of these questions and give you my best possible answers. So, first question, what is global warming and how is it different to climate change? These are two very similar concepts, but global warming just refers to our planet getting warmer and warmer as it traps more and more heat energy, which makes its temperature go up and up. Whereas climate change encompasses all of the different things that result from that extra heat energy, like changes in rainfall patterns. It gets wetter in wet places, it gets drier in dry places. Sea levels change, ice melts, as well as it getting warmer too. So climate change is the more general, broader term. What is my carbon footprint, and can I really make a difference when so many large corporations are not participating? So carbon footprints are a way of thinking about the CO2 that we end up putting into the atmosphere from the things we do in our day-to-day lives. And I think the first thing to say is we can absolutely make a difference, and we can do that in pretty easy ways. This doesn't have to be something that is difficult for us. It can actually be quite a lot of fun. So, for instance, by getting an electric car as an X car, for instance, they go unbelievably quickly. They're really good fun. And by changing your diet a wee bit, not to never eat meat again if you don't want to, right? But just having a bit less of it. It'll be healthier. It'll save you money. So the impact of those things really does add up. If we take eating, for instance, global diets, and if we compare, if everyone switched to what we might call a flexitarian diet, where you just have one portion of meat a week, one portion of dairy per day, compared to if everyone didn't do that, by the time you get to 2050, we're saving as much CO2 as 5 billion tons. So that is the equivalent of all of the CO2 emissions of Europe today, just from everyone making that small change to their diet. So those individual actions really do add up, but we also do want big companies and governments to do their part as well. And the good news here is that lots of companies really are actually stepping up and doing this. A whole bunch of the biggest companies are saying, yep, we are going to try and go net zero. It's not going to be easy for them. And that's why we need to congratulate them for doing it and keep making sure that they move in the right direction. So, will renewable energy help us move to net zero? Easy question. The easy answer is yes. Energy at the moment largely comes from burning fossil fuels, and that puts CO2 into the atmosphere as a waste product. Renewable energy doesn't do that. It produces energy cleanly from the sun, from the wind, from rainwater. And once you've built something like a wind turbine or a solar panel, it just produces energy again and again and again and again without putting any CO2 into the atmosphere. The other thing that's really important about renewable energy is it allows us to use electricity for things that currently burn fossil fuels. What I mean by that is things like cars. At the moment, cars burn fossil fuels in their engines, but if you've got lots and lots and lots of renewable electricity, then you can start to switch things that currently run on fuel to run on electricity instead. So that is another huge win in terms of going for net zero. In essence, the two things we have to do are clean up electricity, so more and more renewables, and electrify everything that can be electrified. So changing fossil fuel cars into electric cars, for instance. So is a global deal realistic, and will it work to tackle climate change? Well, politics is difficult, right? It's much more difficult than science. Science can clearly tell you what's happening and what we need to do about it. But trying to do those things gets into the realm of politics and people's decisions, and that is, of course, trickier. But there's good news here too. So the Paris climate agreements, for instance, were the most ambitious, far-reaching, and had the most global buy-in of any climate agreements that we've ever had. And although famously Donald Trump pulled the US out of Paris, Joe Biden has already said that on day one, the US will be back in. So this really can work. This really does have, I think, global buy-in, and it is already really making a difference. These kinds of global policy shifts account for the fact that, for instance, the UK has had a drop of 30% in its CO2 emissions in the last decade. This change is real, it's happening. There is good news out there. We just need to keep pushing it forward and make sure that our politicians hear that we really want them to make a difference on this. Okay, so now reaching further back into the history of CO2 and climate. Was Joseph Fourier's theory of the greenhouse effect controversial, or was it widely accepted? And what is the kind of history of climate science? How has this been explained over time, and how has it become more and more of a mainstream issue? So the link between CO2 and climate, as touched on in this question, has been known for a long time, and it's really not scientifically controversial. Fourier pointed it out in the 1820s, and then there's a whole series of amazing scientists in the 19th century, so well over 100 years ago, that developed this further. So in my presentation, I talked about Fourier, Tyndall, Arrhenius, but there are others too. Eunice Foote, an American woman in 1858, who was one of the first to explicitly show the link between CO2 and climate. And then Guy Callendar in 1938, a British scientist who started making measurements of temperature and CO2 and looked at the way that rising CO2 was starting to already cause an increase in global temperature. So scientifically, this is really well established, and there's just nothing controversial about it. The controversy comes in much later on. The controversy comes in from politically or economically interested people who want to keep making money by polluting our atmosphere. They want to keep digging up fossil fuels and turning them into CO2. And so it's been one of their tactics, in order to keep doing that, to try and cast doubt on this fundamental, long-settled science. And the same tactics have been used before. They were used by the tobacco industry, when the tobacco industry wanted to convince people that smoking didn't cause cancer. But we know enough to say that that's nonsense. And that's the same with trying to deny that CO2 causes climate change as well, and that this isn't a big impact on our planet. The science of this is dead straightforward. We've known it for 150 years or more. The impact of it is really profound. We need to fix this, and we know how to do that. And I guess finally, the good news on this is that I think we are starting to really turn a corner on this. We're telling those interests, look, we're not actually, as a society, going to stand for more and more CO2 in the atmosphere. We're not going to stand for leaving the planet in a much worse state for our kids than we got it to start with. And this is really actually making a difference. So if you look at OPEC, which is the group of major oil and gas producing nations, in their business report last year, they specifically mention the school climate strikes by young people worldwide as being a threat to their business model. So they know that the tide of opinion is changing because of the action of people just like yourselves who are really taking an interest and getting active in the climate crisis. So what changes do we think will happen to Scotland in 50 years, and which parts of Scotland are most at risk? So I'm afraid the bad news here is that one of the most profound changes that we're likely to see in Scotland is it's going to get wetter. This is summed up. One simple rule of thumb about climate change is that dry places get drier and wet places get wetter. It's just like having pans of water on your stove. If you turn up the heat, that hot place gets drier and drier and drier as that water evaporates with all that extra heat energy. But that water has to go somewhere, and it condenses in your kitchen on the window panes where it's cold. At a planetary scale, it condenses and rains out in colder parts of the planet, like Scotland. So Scotland will get wetter with more rainfall, and this will lead to flooding in places that are susceptible to flooding. So near river, near river valleys, on floodplains. And also there'll be increased risk of flooding coastally as sea levels rise and storms get more intense. So I'm afraid not good news, and well worth fixing. So how can we encourage friends and family who aren't engaged or interested in climate change to make positive changes in their behavior? And how can we counteract false views and negative attitudes? So I think the first thing to say here is, there are some people who just don't want to know about climate change, and whose minds you're never going to change. And I've engaged with a bunch of those people, and it's like banging your head into this office wall here. I mean, there's just, if these people wanted to listen to rational scientific argument, they wouldn't deny that climate change is happening and is going to have a major impact on our planet and our lives. But the good news is that's a tiny, tiny amount of people. They're very noisy, but it's not many people. Lots more people fall into the category of, maybe this is happening. Is it really going to affect me? Can I really make a difference about it? And you guys now know the answer to all those questions. It's definitely happening. It's definitely us. It's definitely serious, and we can make a difference. Simple, serious, and solvable. And the good news here is that across the board, people actually really like the solutions to climate. In fact, even the people who don't want to hear about climate change often really like the idea of the solutions. They're often really keen on the idea of fixing it, because by fixing climate change, we get a whole bunch of other added benefits. What do I mean by this? So if you switch away from burning fossil fuels and instead go for renewables, you reduce air pollution. Just imagine walking through one of our city streets and not smelling all of those exhaust fumes, not having those go into your lungs. And this really does impact people's health. So imagine just doing away with that. Like, everyone has to like that idea. Other good things about this, it creates jobs locally. It supports the economy. All of those wind turbines going up in Scotland are employing people. And this is a growth area, right? We need to do more and more of that. Let's get behind it. We get a bunch of local jobs. We get a bunch of local energy as well. We're less dependent on foreign oil supplies and all of the political difficulties and conflicts that securing those supplies has sometimes led to. And so I think there's a whole bunch of good news on the solutions that people can quite easily get engaged with. This idea that we're going to, rather than being hunter-gatherers for our energy, we're going to farm it instead, and we're going to be able to do that again and again and again. And ultimately, it's going to save us money and boost the economy. That's something that, there's no bad news there. Now, if you think somebody might be interested in climate science as well as the solutions, I think some of the things to chat to them about and engage them with are the fact that this is happening here and now, and it's going to happen even more in the future and to our kids. I think we've often made climate change an issue that thinks too much about, polar bears on melting ice floes. Some people care about that, but actually seems a long way away. And if I'm just concerned about, putting food on the table and trying to get through my day-to-day life, that seems pretty remote and low down my priority list. But I think stressing that this isn't just something that's happening to polar bears, it's happening to people, and people just like us, right? It's happening to people whose houses get damaged by fires, not so much a problem here in Scotland, but floods, yes, absolutely a problem here in Scotland. And that's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And so there's going to be an enormous impact of that on our children. So just think about it this way. If 99% of doctors told you you had to do something for your kids' well-being and health, you'd do it. And here, climate scientists are saying exactly the same thing for the health and well-being of our kids in the future. I think we owe it to them to make sure we make a difference. And I think that's something that everyone, I think, can relate to. So which countries are doing the best in regards to climate policy, and what can other countries learn, and what future tech do I see as helping fight and solve the issue? So the amazing thing about climate solutions is that there's good news kind of almost everywhere that you look for it. So we can start here in Scotland, where over 3/4 of our electricity is produced now without producing CO2. I mean, that's an amazing stat, right? Look around a room, count up 4 light bulbs, and 3 of them aren't producing any CO2 to be powered. I mean, that's just an amazing success story. And this is actually happening, more broadly across the UK as well. There's been this enormous drop in UK CO2 emissions, 30% in the last decade. That is globally leading. There are other countries that have been doing amazing things too. Germany invested a whole load of money in solar panel technology, and it's part of the reason that the cost of solar panels have been coming down and down and down. And that's been taken on by China, who have continued that work, so that producing electricity by solar and wind is now the cheapest way to do it. And because of that, there's huge uptake of these technologies globally. So India, for instance, has just shelved a whole bunch, 84% of the coal-fired power stations that it was planning to build just as recently as last year. They have shelved all those plans for coal, and they're going to build wind and solar instead because it's cheaper. And so there are good news stories all over the world, and they are driven largely by the continued drop in the price of renewables. But that hasn't happened by accident. That has happened because there has been a whole load of research and development into these technologies. And so we need to make sure that that continues, so they get better and better and better and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And that allows us to continue to clean up electricity and to electrify all the things currently running on fuels like cars. So do we have the tech? Yes, we have it. We know what to do. We have the silver bullets. We have the ways to produce electricity without CO2 emissions. And we know how we can electrify a bunch of things that currently run on fuels. We just need to now roll it out as quickly as possible. So how can we make a climate conscious lifestyle more inclusive to lower social economic groups? I think the good news here is that most of the things that you can personally and easily do for climate save you money. So switching to a renewable electricity and gas supplier, they're largely cheaper than the major suppliers from fossil fuels. And they will just continue to get cheaper and cheaper, because once you've built a wind turbine, it produces electricity for free. Other things that you can do, like reducing food waste or eating less meat, these also save you money. These are things that I realized that I was doing kind of anyway, as a Scottish student with hardly any money, and I just always kind of kept doing that because eating meat was quite expensive, and so I saved that to be a special treat, and I don't have it as something that I have every day. I save it for Christmas or other celebrations, for birthdays, or maybe now and again a bacon roll at the weekend. But most of the time, not eating meat will save you a bunch of money. Insulating your home as well. It makes it cozier and it reduces your energy bills, and you can get support to insulate your home to help alleviate that upfront cost from the Energy Saving Trust. So there are a bunch of things that you can do that should be pretty inclusive to everyone, because and everyone wins by saving cash. But I think perhaps even more importantly, some of the most important and most effective things that you can do are totally free. And that's talking about this, making it part of your life, making it an issue you care about, writing a letter or an email or a tweet to your politicians. Politicians say that for every one of their constituents who writes to them, they know that there's maybe 1,000 more thinking exactly the same thing. And so getting active is super important. It's super effective. Politicians have totally changed their tune on climate change over the last 10 years, thanks to people like you getting in touch with them. And you can do that absolutely for free. And it's so, so, so important. Okay, so final question was, what's the overall goal with reducing the damage from climate change? What's it expected to look like? What are the realistic timescales for fixing this problem? So the overall goal is quite simply to give our children a better planet to live in. And to do this, we have to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere to save them from facing more and more fires and floods and all of the human suffering that that entails. The good news is that we have started this work already and it's making a difference. What timescale do we need to do it on? As much as possible, as soon as possible. We have started and we just need to continue full steam ahead, doing everything we possibly can. It's a big challenge, but it's worth it. It's going to make the world a better place for our kids, which is, I think, the most important thing that we can do as a society. So let's get behind this. Imagine a better future, right? There is a better world ahead of us, one that has renewable jobs, cleaner air, and produces electricity without damaging our planet. And let's rush towards that. Let's make that our generation's issue, and let's make this change. And in particular here in Scotland, let's do that with a big focus in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow next year.